Hi everyone, here it is, the moment you've all been waiting for, assignment 1. Yes, this is it. I know you've been so excited, waiting with bated breath. Just kidding. This is not supposed to be too scary, okay? This assignment is designed to get you working with material that you've been working with already, to kind of solidify it in your mind. And again, all these assignments are leading up to a final project that's going to allow you to rehash it a bit more. So what I'm doing here in this video is going over this with you verbally the same way that I would in class. Okay, always happy to answer questions for clarification, but before you write to me, please make sure you read the instructions. And because I always get a lot of questions from students, and I'm like, the answer's there. So I put a lot of time into this, trying to make it as clear as possible. So, if something's not clear in here, tell me exactly what part of it is not clear. Just don't write to me saying I don't understand the assignment. Tell me what exactly it is. And if it really is all confusing to you, please book an appointment with me so that we can go over it together and not go back and forth a million times by Mayo, because that's exhausting for all of us, right? Okay, so let's have a look. So again, there are two main goals here. One is to give you the opportunity to go back to those weekly quizzes we've been doing and kind of learn from them, right? Because maybe you go through it the first time and it's kind of rote and you kind of do it, and then then you stop looking at it and thinking about it. So this gets you to go back in there and kind of look at what things were confusing to you and try to figure them out a bit more. And then you get to pick two other topics from the stuff in our textbook, either new stuff that we haven't really covered or stuff that we have but you want to know more about, and to go into a bit more depth. Okay, so it's not a big essay or anything like that. I'm trying to keep things somewhat simple. And also, of course, this is always an opportunity to read, to work a bit more on reading comprehension, structure, how your writing structure, paragraphs, sentences, grammar, all that stuff that some people have trouble with. So there's two parts. There's two main parts to this assignment. Part 1 involves these weekly quizzes that we've been doing. So there are instructions here on how to go back into an old assignment. Some of you, I don't know, everybody organizes their email differently, but if you still have some of those emails from, every week you get an email when I upload a new quiz, if you still have one of those, if you go back to it, you'll see that you can click on the quiz directly. You can also click on dashboard. So if you click on dashboard, it'll take you to your dashboard on My Daylight, and you'll see a list of all the quizzes we've done so far. If you don't have any of those emails anymore because you're good about deleting all your old stuff, well, then you can follow this link here, and you're going to see student access and login right underneath. Click on login, and then go back to your email. You will have received an email with a new link to your dashboard. Okay? So both of those things are fine. You'll wind up on your dashboard, and once you're there, so point 2 here, choose any of the quizzes we've done so far between quiz weeks 1 and 4. Okay? By the time you're working on this, quiz 5 will be out, but just focus on 1 to 4 for this, all right? And then, if you click on any quiz, you'll see it'll take you to a new page, and it'll say, you've done this assignment already, and then there's a button that says go back to the assignment. So you click on that, and then you'll see the questions listed there, and for each question, you're going to see the original choice you made between true or false, the rationale that you wrote, and then it'll show you the expert rationale. So the one that I put in is kind of one of the ideal types of responses that we're looking for each question. It doesn't mean it's perfect, right? But it gives you a good idea of what I'm trying to get people to understand through this particular question. So look through these 4 quizzes, look at those questions, and maybe there's some that you're like, I don't understand why I got this wrong, or, I got it right, but I'm still kind of confused by this topic. And choose 2 that you find a little bit like, they're difficult, or you had a hard time with them. And then there's a worksheet on page 3 and 4, and we're going to scroll down there right away and come back to part 2 later. Okay, so if I go to page 3 where the worksheet starts, So here, there's 2 pages on the worksheet. They're identical, all right? One for each question. So chosen question 2 here, chosen question 1. So you're going to do the same thing twice with 2 different questions. I suggest trying to maybe look at different quizzes, but if you have 2 really confusing ones that are in the same one, then that's fine, right? So copy and paste the question here, like my original question to you, like whether it was about the comparative approach or natural selection or whatever. You should be able to copy paste it here. Sometimes when you do that from a website, it winds up being really big, but if you do that, you paste something, then it gives you options to you can use like format painter. Did you know that? Like if you click format paint, like you put your mouse on something that is already in the document, you click this paintbrush, and then you scroll the paintbrush over the new text that's all wonky, and it should make it look like the rest of the text. So here, what you're going to do is write down, circle true or false. Which one was your original response that you said it was true or false? Not necessarily the right one, what you first chose, and what you wrote down as a rationale. So again, you can copy paste that directly into the document. Then, compare your rationale to what's listed there as an expert rationale, and think about, well, how close do you feel your own rationale was? For example, do they contradict each other? Like your response was completely opposite to the expert rationale? Was yours kind of close but missing a lot of information? Or, it could be that maybe I should rephrase this. It doesn't necessarily have to be confusing questions, but, whatever, right? Did yours actually cover all the same points or even more than in the expert rationale, right? So kind of you're trying to see what the similarities and differences between your original rationale and the expert rationale, just to get you to think, okay, well, what's going on here? What am I having a hard time with? If that's the case, right? Special note for those of you who maybe went through all the quizzes and you're reading all the stuff and you're getting it all and you feel this doesn't apply to you, alternatively, you can kind of go with questions that you want to talk about, that you're more interested in than the others, and that you want to dig in a little bit deeper. And then you'll still go through that process of comparison, but you'll see here for question 3 here that you have different options, including bouncing off of like, well, I covered all the same points and even more than in the expert rationale, so I got this, right? So depending on your situation, answer one of the following 2 questions here for number 3. If you feel your rationale needs improvement, so maybe you put in like a line and a half and you're like, you were way off base, or and you got you got the wrong answer twice. You selected true, and then you saw all these other rationales and you selected true again, but the right response was false. Well, regardless, right? You didn't really quite get it right. Well, find information on this topic in the textbook. Right? So, you can kind of trace back which week's quiz goes with which chapter or chapters in the textbook. You have my slides for each week as well. But go for the textbook because there's more in-depth explanations. My slides are only like a skeleton of some points, right? So based on the information that you find in the textbook, write a new rationale for what you now know is the correct response. So again, this is in cases where you kind of feel like you didn't really, even if you had the right choice of true or false, you felt your response was way off track, because that's possible. Sometimes people think something is true, but they think it's true for the wrong reason, or false or whatever. So you were way off track the first time, but now you're reading up on it again, you're starting to get it. Well, then write a new rationale that you think is better. You can look at the expert rationale. It's going to be there in your face anyway, so I'm not expecting you not to see it. You can use it as guidance to help you think through it, but you really need to put things in your own words and refer back to specific things from the textbook to show me that you didn't just read my rationale and reword it. You went in the textbook and informed yourself a bit more, okay? And include the page number where you got your information. Now, if you feel your rationale, the questions you chose because you didn't really have a hard time with any of them, and you're kind of going through this like, well, no, I'm not confused about any of this, you're just picking questions where you wanted to dig a little bit more. Well, if you feel your rationale was as good as or even better than the expert rationale, because that can happen, right? I don't put everything in there because it's a lot of work. So at some point I just put the the basics, right? So then what you can do is find more in-depth information on the topic because it's something you're interested in, and think to yourself, you know, if I was a tutor, for example, and I was helping a fellow student understand this material better, how would I explain it to them? And that can, some of it might resemble your original rationale, but you're going to want to add a bit more meat, you know, because you're putting yourself in that situation where that expert rationale or your original rationale, that's not enough. The student's still not getting it. Well, how would you dig more, and how would you try to phrase it to them so that they would get it? Okay, so you're going to do this twice for 2 different questions out of those 4 quizzes. So again, you can just fill it in directly here for the first one, and then part 1 continues here with your second question, and same thing. So that's part 1. All right. If I go back to the first page and look at part 2, now for this part of the assignment, you can, so each chapter in the textbook has at the very end, or almost at the very end, just before the reference list, it has review questions. Okay, so the first 4 weeks we looked at chapters 1 to 5. We didn't cover everything. Okay, so you know, look at the review questions and choose 2 of them that you find interesting. But in this case, do make sure that your 2 chosen review questions are from 2 different chapters, because we want to mix it up a little bit. So for example, you might pick one from chapter 1 and one from chapter 4, or one from chapter 2 and one from chapter 5, whatever. You know, whatever, and you know, find things that are of interest to you. We didn't cover everything in every chapter, right? So you might remember, if you've been looking at my slides as well, and maybe the videos that I've been making, you've seen that I've been focusing on certain things. Not all those things made it to the weekly quizzes even, because I try to I'm trying not to overload you with work and not give you 10 questions every week. So, you know, look at the slides to see, well, what have we covered? And if you want to make sure you're dealing with stuff that you've already focused on, then, you know, maybe pick 2 questions that are things that we've been covering and that we've been talking about. But if you want to dig into some new stuff, I mean, there's stuff from, like, in chapters in week 3, where we were drawing from both chapters 3 and 4, there's huge chunks there that I didn't assign, right? So if ever you're interested in reading up about stuff that was not assigned in those chapters, that's up to you. All right, this part here is very much based on your interest, areas where you'd like to dig a little bit more. So it's up to you whether you want to stick to things that we've covered, things I actually assigned in those chapters, especially those chapters where I didn't assign the whole chapter because I did a little bit from 2 chapters and merged them, like natural selection and primates in the same week. But again, I leave that up to you. So for each review question that you chose, simply write a paragraph to answer that question. 100 to 150 words is reasonable. I'm not super picky. If it's 98, that's fine. If it's 170, that's fine. You're not writing a full essay here, though, okay? So no introduction and conclusion. You're just writing like 1 paragraph per answer. Just get straight to the point and answer the question. Obviously, you're going to want to tell me what question it is, which chapter and question. I should add that here. And then these 2 paragraphs for these 2 questions, you're just gonna, you know, go to the end of the document here. So after this, and you'll just, after your response ends here, you'll just type them in for part 2. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to part 2. So that's pretty much it. There's part 1 and 2. In part 1, you're revisiting the quizzes, and part 2, you're looking at the review questions from the end of each of the chapters that we've been dealing with. So here, I put this in red. I don't like writing in red because it looks angry. But anyway, before you start, I really need you all to look at the assessment criteria that's on page 2, as well as the submission instructions. So before you even start, like when you're just looking at this the first time, maybe you watched the video and now you're like, you're going to look at this because you can't read when I'm talking at you. I'm like that. I can't read when someone's talking at me. So, you know, so the criteria, they're important to know, again, before you start. So I need to see specific references to material from the textbook. And what this means, because sometimes students don't understand what I mean by this, and we're not in person where I can remind you over and over. For example, explanations of concepts based on what's written in the textbook. Okay, so you're going to look at the textbook to get your information, and then they're talking, for example, about ethnocentrism. This is what ethnocentrism means. So read that. Okay, and then that's what you're gonna refer to. Well, the authors of the textbook talk about ethnocentrism. This is what they have to say. All right, that's what I want to see, so that you didn't just come up with this out of thin air. Include the page number from the textbook where you got the information too. I need to see that. And we're not going to use APA. It's not an essay, and we're not there yet. We're not going to use like APA citations where you have to put the author's names and all this stuff. We'll do that in the very final paper, and I'll give you some information about that for those of you who aren't used to it yet. If you are used to APA, like you've done it before, and you're looking to improve on that and you'd like feedback, you can go ahead and do that. All right, so if you want to put your citations, if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, because you don't have to do it. But if you've already done APA and you find it like, ugh, you know, I have a lot of work to master this, feel free to use it and I'll give you feedback, but there won't be any marks attached to it. So it's a low risk way to practice for you if this is something you want to improve. I'm also going to be looking, when I'm marking, I'm going to be looking at accuracy of information from the textbook. So that means, you know, I'm looking for people to like represent what was actually written in the textbook. So like if somebody tells me that ethnocentrism means that, I don't know, what could ethnocentrism mean? Other than what it means. Like you have this totally incorrect definition of explanation of, I'm not looking for definitions, I'm looking for explanations where you're explaining how things work. So if you tell me that ethnocentrism, like you give me a description of it that sounds more like what cultural relativism is, that's inaccurate, and you're going to lose marks for that. And what this means, though, from your point of view when you're reading the textbook, this is a very common problem that students have. And I know you're all rushed, you have a million things to do, I do too, but they'll look at the textbook, right? And they find the word, and then they read maybe 2 or 3 sentences, and they put the book away, and they base their thing on that. The way textbooks are written is that they introduce a topic, and very often they'll have a few paragraphs where they give examples and more fleshed out explanations of how this works. So you need to look at a bigger section of text than just that one line where they explain the term. And I'm going to see that reflected in your responses. So we're working on the skill of like summarizing something. You might have an explanation that takes 3 paragraphs in the textbook, and you're trying to kind of get the main points of it and stick it in your response. Okay? Clarity and coherence of information. I mean, your thoughts, especially in those longer paragraphs for part 2, they should follow in a logical order, right? So generally what that means, those of you who choose to use specific examples, like maybe in the textbook, the thing you're dealing with, they give an example from a culture somewhere. But the example usually comes after the explanation of what that is. So you wouldn't start with that thing, well, in this culture they do this, blah, 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 blah. Well, why are you telling me this? Tell me that first. Like, what concept are you talking about? What first of all, what question are you answering? And, you know, give a bit of context before jumping into those concrete examples. So that's when we're talking about clarity and coherence of information, it has to kind of make sense like that. Because if you just go up to somebody and start telling them, well, in this culture they do this, and the person's like, well, why are you telling me this, right? So it's the same thing here. There has to be a context. Paraphrasing. Okay, folks, we're going to keep it real here. A lot of you, 75% of you, I would say, have a really hard time with paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is putting things in your own words, but that isn't just taking a sentence and then moving the words around, and you know, it's beyond that. So actually, you know what, I'll put in a link after this video to some resources that can help you learn to paraphrase better, because that's a very common student problem. Students tend to take things word for word from the text, and that's unfortunately an automatic 0. I'll put that in there too, because that's considered plagiarism. So you don't want to do that. I'd rather see a sentence that's badly written but that's not plagiarized than a perfect sentence that's actually not yours. All right? So you're not writing an essay here, so don't do direct quotations either, all right? Because I want to get you to practice the paraphrasing. And if you're just using direct quotations and you say, well, I'm not I'm not plagiarizing because I put the quotations and I put the page number and I put the APA thing, but I don't want you to do that here. I want you to paraphrase, because it's not a skill people get enough practice in a low stakes way, right? And then by the time you're writing these big essays, you haven't learned how to do it properly, and then you get nailed for plagiarism, and that's no fun, right? So all these are things I look at. In terms of things like spelling, grammar, and sentence structure, there's no mark set aside for it, but I kind of work on a penalty basis for that. So if you only have a few minor errors here and there, it's like typos, things like that, I'll highlight it in yellow or something so that you can see there was an error, but I won't remove any marks. If you have more than 10, though, because then that starts to get into the territory of, well, you didn't bother proofreading your thing, you just handed it in to me. And that's not really respectful in the professional world, to just give something to somebody without checking to test the quality for it. So if you have a lot of those minor errors, then there's a little penalty there. If you have 10 or more really bad mistakes, like they're really like huge mistakes, they're not just little minor errors like you forgot the D on and it looks like an N, which doesn't get caught right by spell checker, or little things like that, but big things, right? Then the penalty is bigger. And if it's to the point where there's so many mistakes that I can't even understand what you're saying, then the penalty is bigger, and then we'll have to have a talk. Now, this is awkward, right? Because I know people have different levels of fluency in the language of instruction here, but as a college, we have to mark for this. So I work in this capacity, but there are people at the Learning Center. You can click here, you can make an appointment with someone, and they can help you with this stuff. So if you're struggling with spelling, grammar, things like that, there are people who are there to help you, and I really encourage you to go see them. Make an appointment with them before the due date of this assignment, and they'll be happy to help you. And also, if, I didn't put this here, but I will talk about this again. For assignments like this, if you lost a lot of points and you could have done better, I do accept resubmissions. That doesn't mean you need to try to do a crappy job on the first go. Do your best, but if your best that time was not quite what you hoped it would be, that's how you learn, is by redoing it. So we'll have a talk about that, and we'll establish a reasonable deadline that works for both of us, and that's something that's doable. Okay? Folks, so how are you going to do this? So part 1, you fill out the worksheet on pages 3 and 4. Part 2, you put your responses after the worksheet. You can, once you're done and you don't need any of this anymore, you can just cut all these instructions on the first 2 pages. All right, and then you're just going to upload this document to Leah, where you got it, in Assignments in Dropbox. And finally, last thing, here's the explanation of how I'm working for late penalties. I do accept late work up to 7 days late. Beyond that, it has to be negotiated. I know sometimes things happen in life and people get sick and whatnot, but we need to talk about that. So after the due date, I do accept them, like I said, up to 7 days, but there's a 2% per day penalty, and that includes weekends, because we're online now. So, right? And so, it's a minor penalty. 2% per day is not a lot, but it's enough to drive it home that it's important to meet your deadlines. It's not just us giving you a hard time. It's, for me, I do this to help teach students the value of courtesy in the professional world. Because in the work world, if you're working somewhere and somebody, a colleague or a manager, is waiting for a report from you, and you agreed to give it to them on Thursday, and Thursday comes, nothing. Well, maybe they were planning their workload around that. They were waiting for this, and this doesn't come, and now they have to change their whole schedule to accommodate you without warning. That's not cool. So it's the same with teachers, and I think teachers don't talk about this enough, but when we set deadlines, well, I know I'm going to get a batch of essays on, or not essays, this assignment, it's due on February, I don't have the date in for it, but let's say the 15th, okay? And that day, I'm setting aside a few hours, or the next day, whatever, I'm working around this. All right, but then half of you decide you're going to give it to me 2 days later. That means I spent some time marking on this day, but then a few days later I have to move other things out of my schedule to accommodate those of you who didn't bother telling me that you were going to hand stuff in late. So that's where the penalty is there, is to drive that message home so that you can practice being more courteous to your colleagues and managers someday, or even wherever you work now. I am kind, though. I do give extensions. I'm pretty flexible on that. If people come to me and they're honest about what's going on, you don't have to tell me all the details, but like, I'm having personal problems, or I procrastinated and I see I was wrong to procrastinate. Like, just be straight with me. Don't give me a bullshit answer about your fifth grandmother dying. Okay? Just be straight with me, and usually we'll talk about it. We'll find a fair number of days that would help you out, but that is not exaggerated. And but I need to that you need to talk to me more than like before the day it's due. So I ask you to ask for extensions at least 24 hours before the due date. Okay? So that's it for this assignment. Like I said, after this video, if you're still confused, sit and read these carefully, take some notes, and then if you're still confused, then reach out to me and we'll find a time to meet, and I'll kind of answer your questions. So have fun.